The blue harbor glowed in dim amber light, saxophone notes curling through the haze of cigar smoke and murmured laughter. It was a place of elegance, velvet curtains drawn against the snowstorm outside, where powerful men made quiet deals behind glass of bourbon and the music was only a distraction from the secrets traded at tables. Jackson Morris, known in Brooklyn's underworld as the Silent Fox, sat at a corner booth, back against the wall, his eyes fixed on the entrance. His suit was black, tailored, but without ostentation. He cut his steak with steady precision, every movement controlled, his posture rigid. Across from him, 9-year-old Emma spun her fork through a mound of pasta, her legs swinging restlessly beneath the table. She had his sharp eyes but her mother's softness, a contrast that made strangers glance twice. "Daddy," she said suddenly, tilting her head toward the glowing double doors, "why do you always watch the door?" Jack didn't smile. He dabbed his mouth with a napkin, scanning a couple entering, then returning his gaze to her. "Old habit, sweetheart," he murmured, his voice low, carrying the weight of secrets she couldn't yet imagine. He reached across the table, straightening the ribbon in her hair with the same hand that once pulled a trigger without hesitation. "Eat your dinner." But even as she lowered her gaze to her plate, Jack's attention never wavered. The entrance was a mirror of his past, a place where death might step inside at any moment. The door of Blue Harbor opened with a hiss of wind, carrying in flakes of snow that melted instantly against the polished floor. A woman stepped inside, no coat, damp hair clinging to her cheeks, her breath unsteady. She moved with the wariness of someone who had learned long ago that danger wore many faces. Clara chose a table near the kitchen, the corner where shadows gathered and exits were close. She sat quickly, her back straight, fingers tapping restlessly against the wood. A glass of wine appeared before her, untouched, trembling slightly as she reached for it. Emma noticed first. Her small fork froze midair, her eyes wide with childish perception. "Daddy," she whispered, leaning across the table, she looked scared and sad. Jack's jaw tightened. "Don't stare," he warned softly, but his own gaze betrayed him. For a man who trusted no strangers, he found his eyes returning to her silhouette again and again, measuring the tremor in her hand, the way her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to disappear. Something about her didn't belong here. And Jack Morris never ignored what didn't belong. The saxophone slid into a low, aching note, and for a moment the bar seemed lulled, wrapped in velvet sound. Then the doors opened again. 2 men entered together, shaking snow from their coats, carrying insulated bags marked with the logo of a local food courier. To most, they might have passed for late-night delivery boys. But not to Jack Morris. His gaze sharpened instantly. Their steps were too measured, their eyes scanning too carefully. Predators in borrowed uniforms. The taller one had a cauliflower ear and a pale scar running jaggedly across his jaw, as if his face had once met the wrong end of a blade. The stockier one, fists twisted and swollen, bore the hands of a brawler who'd left too many bodies behind in alleys and rings alike. They didn't look toward the bar or the music. Their eyes locked on the corner near the kitchen. On Clara. She stiffened before the rest of the room sensed anything. Her fingers faltered around the stem of her wineglass, a single drop spilled, glistening against her trembling hand. She didn't move, didn't breathe, like a deer realizing the brush was no longer safe. The silence spread slowly, like a ripple. Conversations thinned, laughter died out. Even the musicians faltered, their instruments sliding into dissonance before recovering. The air inside Blue Harbor thickened with something unspoken, recognition. Emma pressed closer to her father, her small voice barely audible. "Daddy, are they bad men?" Jack didn't answer. His eyes tracked the newcomers, measuring the distance, the exits, the weapons surely hidden beneath their coats. In his world, hesitation could kill. Yet tonight, something gnawed at him, the sight of a woman frozen in dread, and the child beside him, watching, waiting for his judgment. The taller man's hand brushed his jacket, as if to test the weight beneath. The stocky one's stare was fixed and merciless. Blue Harbor was no longer a sanctuary of jazz and wine. It had become a stage. And Clara Lombardo was the target under the spotlight. Emma's small hand clutched at Jack's sleeve, her fingers trembling with urgency. Her wide eyes shimmered with tears as she whispered, "Daddy, please save her." The words were fragile, yet they struck him harder than any bullet. In Jack's world, mercy was weakness, and weakness meant death. He had lived years by one law: protect only your own. But now, in the dim glow of the jazz bar, his daughter's voice begged him to break it. His gaze shifted between Emma's pleading face and Clara's rigid silhouette. The woman's lips parted slightly, as if she might cry out, but fear sealed her throat. She was alone, cornered, and marked. For a long second, Jack sat frozen, his hand wrapped around his glass, heart hammering in silence. Then he pushed the drink aside and rose. The motion was unhurried, deliberate, but every line of his body carried the weight of a decision. Emma's fingers clung to him, desperate. He bent briefly, whispering low, "Stay down, sweetheart. Don't move." When Jack Morris straightened, the silent fox was no longer simply a father at dinner. He was a predator stepping back into his hunting ground. And the two men who thought they'd chosen their moment had no idea that theirs was already over. The moment Jack stood, the atmosphere in Blue Harbor shifted. It wasn't the music or the laughter anymore, it was silence, tense and brittle, like glass about to break. Jack's eyes flicked once to the exit, then to the sprinklers above, mapping the battlefield in an instant. The tall courier with the scar shifted his weight, fingers brushing the inside of his coat. The stocky one's jaw flexed, his hand already gripping cold steel. They hadn't expected interference. They'd come for Clara, an easy job, a clean execution, hidden under the noise of jazz. But they had walked into the wrong room. Jack made his move. Instead of reaching for his gun, he grabbed a steak knife and hurled it toward the ceiling. The blade struck a fire alarm, and the piercing wail cut through the smoky air. In the same second, the overhead sprinklers erupted, rain cascading over velvet curtains and polished floors, turning the elegant bar into chaos. Patrons screamed. Couples leapt from their seats, chairs scraping, glasses shattering as diners rushed toward the doors. Musicians abandoned their instruments, the saxophone's final note drowned beneath panic. The air filled with the acrid tang of wet smoke and perfume, bodies pushing against one another in desperation. Amid the chaos, Jack drew. His pistol appeared as naturally as breath, an extension of his hand. He fired once, clean, precise. The scarred man staggered back, crimson blooming across his chest. He fell without a sound, his courier bag sliding from his shoulder like discarded skin. The second one roared, drawing his weapon. The crack of gunfire split the room. Bullets ripped through polished wood, splinters flying. Glass exploded from the bar's shelves, bottles raining down in a kaleidoscope of shattered amber and green. Diners shrieked as fragments sliced the air. Jack dropped behind a table, flipping it on its side as cover. The wood shuddered under the boxer's relentless fire. He could hear Emma's muffled sob beneath their booth, her small voice trembling, "Daddy, please." It was a prayer, a plea, and a command all at once. Clara had not moved. She sat paralyzed, her wine glass still trembling in her hand, rain dripping from the sprinklers into her hair. Her eyes met Jack's across the chaos. For the briefest second, the fear in her gaze sharpened into something else, recognition. She knew this man wasn't just any protector. He was something far darker. Jack shifted, counting the boxer's rhythm, the pauses between shots. Then he rolled sideways, coming up fast. His own shot cracked, the recoil sharp in his palm. The bullet found its mark. The boxer jerked once, twice, then collapsed forward, his gun clattering to the soaked floor. Silence followed, eerie and raw. Only the fire alarm screamed on, water cascading over bodies and broken glass. Emma crawled out from under the table, her little hands shaking as she grabbed his leg. "Did we save her, Daddy?" she whispered, her voice trembling, wide eyes searching his face. Jack holstered his weapon slowly, scanning the bar. 2 bodies on the ground. 1 woman alive, frozen in shock. His daughter clinging to him as if the world might collapse without his strength. He crouched, cupping Emma's wet cheek in his palm. "Yeah," he said softly, though his eyes stayed hard, scanning for more danger. "We saved her." But even as he said the words, Jack knew it wasn't over. Because men like these didn't work alone. And if Clara Lombardo was worth killing in public, in the middle of a crowded jazz bar, then the storm was only just beginning. Clara finally set down her glass, her voice breaking through the ringing alarm. "You shouldn't have done that." Jack looked at her, water dripping from his suit, the shadows of his past heavy in his gaze. "Lady," he murmured, his tone as sharp as the gun still warm in his hand, "I didn't do it for you." But when he glanced at Emma's tear-streaked face pressed against his side, he realized that was only half true. The sprinklers sputtered once, then finally died, leaving the jazz bar drowned in silence and the reek of gunpowder, spilled wine, and fear. Smoke curled faintly from shattered light bulbs, and water dripped rhythmically from ruined chandeliers. The once elegant Blue Harbor looked like a battlefield, overturned tables, broken bottles bleeding amber across the floor, 2 bodies sprawled in the wreckage. Jack Morris stood still, weapon lowered but not yet holstered, scanning every shadow as if another gunman might step forward. His senses remained taut, wired for danger. In his world, survival wasn't in the kill, it was in what came after. Emma clung to him, her small fingers buried in the fabric of his soaked jacket. She was trembling but silent now, her big eyes fixed on the woman in the corner. Clara hadn't moved since the last shot. She sat rigid, her damp hair clinging to her face, hands locked around the empty stem of a shattered wine glass as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the moment. Jack approached her slowly, boots echoing on the wet floor. Up close, she was not what he expected. Her fear was obvious, but beneath it lived something sharper, awareness, calculation. Her eyes, though wide, were not the vacant eyes of the helpless. They measured him in return, as though she were weighing not just his actions but his entire soul. "You're alive," Jack said flatly, his tone a mix of statement and warning. Clara's lips parted, and for a moment she said nothing. Then, with a trembling breath, she answered, "For now." Emma tilted her head, clutching Jack's sleeve. "Daddy, who is she?" Jack didn't answer. Instead, his gaze flicked down at the hitmen's bodies. Something about them unsettled him. He knelt by the scarred man, pushing back the courier's jacket. There, on the pale wrist, was ink, dark, deliberate. A tattoo of a dagger coiled by a serpent. Jack's stomach tightened. Recognition burned like acid in his throat. He knew that mark. Years ago, before he had built his empire clean of their influence, they had moved in his shadows, the serpent crew. Extinct, he had believed. buried and gone. But no. They were back. And they were here, inside his city. His eyes rose to Clara. "You're going to tell me why men like this wanted you dead?" Her gaze flicked to Emma, small, wide-eyed, pressing herself against her father's side. Clara's own breath caught, her face softening for just a heartbeat, before she straightened. She set the broken stem down carefully on the wet table and folded her trembling hands together, as though bracing herself against a storm she'd carried too long. "My name is Clara Lombardo," she said at last. The words cracked through the silence like thunder. Jack felt his pulse hammer once. That name hadn't been spoken in this city for over a decade. He studied her sharply. "Lombardo is dead. Wiped out. Every last one of them." Her eyes did not flinch. "Not every last one." The weight of her confession seemed to shift the very air in the room. Jack could almost hear the echoes of gunfire from 15 years ago, the whispers of war between clans, the night the Lombardo Empire burned. Families exterminated, children buried under false names. He had thought them erased from history. And yet here she was, flesh and blood, dripping water onto the ruined floor of Blue Harbor. Clara leaned closer, her voice trembling, but not from weakness. "I am the last Lombardo. And I carry what they died to protect." Jack narrowed his eyes. "Which is?" She hesitated, then dropped her gaze to her lap. "Accounts. Hidden, locked, untouched since the massacre. Hundreds of millions, maybe more. Money enough to rebuild what was lost. Money enough to start a war." Emma tilted her head, confused, but clung tighter to Jack's arm, sensing the darkness in the woman's words. Jack rose, pacing a slow circle, his shoes cutting ripples through the water on the floor. He had no patience for ghosts, but what Clara offered wasn't a ghost, it was dynamite. In his world, money wasn't power. Leverage was. And leverage of that scale could shift the balance of Brooklyn forever. His gaze slid once more to the ink on the dead man's wrist, the serpent and dagger. Old allies turned scavengers. But why here, why now? As if sensing his thoughts, Clara whispered, "They're not just after me. Tonight wasn't just a hunt, it was a message. Whoever sent them wanted you to see this, silent fox." Jack froze, his eyes snapping to hers. She knew his name, his real name, the one spoken only in the dark corners of the underworld. He stepped closer, his hand instinctively brushing his daughter's shoulder as if to shield her. "Careful," he said softly, menace wrapped in velvet. "You speak my name too freely." But Clara didn't cower. Her eyes, wet from rain and fear, glimmered with something else, defiance, or maybe desperation. "If I know your name, then you know I'm not lying. And you also know that someone in your empire sold you out. The serpents weren't just here for me. They wanted you in the crossfire." Jack's jaw clenched. The betrayal hit harder than bullets. He had built his empire on silence, discipline, loyalty. For someone to let enemies inside his walls, worse, to use his daughter's dinner as bait, was an unforgivable sin. Emma pressed close, her voice small, almost breaking. "Daddy, are we in danger?" Jack crouched, cupping her face with his wet hand. His voice was calm, steady, but his eyes burned with fury. "Not while I'm here." He rose again, meeting Clara's gaze. "You brought war to my table, Lombardo. And you'd better pray you're worth more alive than dead." But deep inside, where the fox in him lived, Jack already knew the truth, she was. Because if the world thought Clara Lombardo was dead, then her survival meant one thing: every predator in Brooklyn would come hunting to finish the job. And now, Thanks to his daughter's plea, her war had become his. The silent fox had been dragged back into the shadows. And this time, there was no walking away. The blue harbor still stank of smoke and wet ash when Jack finally stepped outside with Emma pressed close against his side and Clara trailing behind, her damp hair clinging to her pale cheeks. Sirens wailed distantly, but none dared approach the bar yet. Police in this part of Brooklyn knew better. They waited until the underworld cleaned its mess. The snow had thickened into heavy flakes, spinning under the streetlights. Jack lit a cigarette with steady hands, but his mind burned hotter than the flame. Betrayal. That word chewed at him like acid. Inside his empire, loyalty had always been currency. He trusted only a handful of men, and each had earned it through years of blood. His right hand, Victor DeSantis, would never betray him. Too blunt, too loyal, too bound by old debts. His consigliere, older than sin, survived by protecting the family name. No, it had to be someone invisible, someone no one suspected. And then it struck him like a cold blade. The accountant. Raymond Cole. Quiet, diligent, almost invisible. The man who balanced ledgers, managed wires, tucked away profits across shell corporations. He'd been with Jack for years, his presence so ordinary it vanished into the background. Which made him perfect. The fox in him saw it clearly now, all the leaks, the minor stumbles, the rumors whispered at just the right time. They hadn't been chance. They had been seeds, planted carefully by the one man no one would ever suspect. Clara's voice broke the silence. It wasn't just for me, Fox. The serpents wanted to remind you that your walls aren't as strong as you believe. Whoever betrayed you, they sit close. Too close. Jack exhaled smoke, staring at the snow-dusted pavement. I know who it is. Emma tugged on his sleeve, her eyes round with confusion. Daddy, who? He didn't answer her. She was too young to know what betrayal meant in his world. Instead, he pressed a kiss against her forehead, then guided her toward the waiting car. She slid inside obediently, clutching the small stuffed rabbit she always carried, its fur now soaked and smelling faintly of gunpowder. Clara hesitated at the curb, her arms folded tightly. The cold air made her shiver, but her eyes were burning. You should have let me die tonight, she said bitterly. It would have been easier. Jack turned, his shadow stretching under the street lamp, his voice low and edged. Maybe. But my daughter asked me to save you. That makes you my problem now. For the first time, Clara almost smiled. But it was a fragile thing, quickly swallowed by her own fear. If I stay alive, more will come. The accounts my family hid, they're not just money. They're history. Alliances written in numbers. And enemies will kill to keep that buried. Jack studied her, his gray eyes sharp. And you're offering me what? A war chest? Clara shook her head. No. I'm offering you an alliance. Your power, my bloodline. Together, we can hold against what's coming. Alone, she glanced at the corpses still being dragged out of the bar by Jack's men. We die. For a long moment, the only sound was the hiss of tires on wet asphalt and the distant jazz that still played faintly inside the ruined bar, a broken lullaby. Jack looked back into the car. Emma sat pressed against the window, her eyes on him, silently pleading. She had always been his anchor, the only thing that kept the silent fox tethered to something resembling humanity. Tonight, she had forced his hand. She had made him choose to be a hero, if only for a heartbeat. And now the price of that choice was written in blood. He dropped his cigarette into the snow, grinding it under his shoe. Get in the car, Lombardo, he said finally. Clara blinked. So you'll help me? His eyes flicked toward her, sharp and cold. Don't mistake this for kindness. You bring fire to my doorstep, you'll burn with me. But yes. We're bound now. Your enemies are mine. My war is yours. For the first time, Clara breathed deeply, as if she had been holding her lungs prisoner for years. Yet in her relief, there was also a tremor, because she understood, she had chained herself to a man feared even among monsters. The car door shut with a heavy thud. Emma slid against her father's side as Clara settled opposite them, her damp clothes clinging to her skin. In the passing streetlights, their faces flashed and vanished, one child, one mafia boss, one forgotten heir. An unlikely trinity, heading into a storm. Jack Morris leaned back, closing his eyes for just a second. Betrayal within his empire. The serpents rising from their graves. Clara Lombardo reborn from ashes. And his daughter, innocent yet already entangled in bloodlines older than her. War wasn't coming. War was already here. And somewhere in the dark, Raymond Cole, the quiet accountant, was no doubt counting the hours until his betrayal would crush the silent fox. But Jack smiled faintly, the cruel smile of a man who had hunted predators his whole life. Let him think he's clever, he muttered under his breath. Let him think he's safe. Because the fox had already scented his prey.